I originally assumed this was going to be some kind of Amazon scam listing where it's a sketchy third-party seller, but I did double check. This is shipped and sold by Amazon. We finally have the RTX 5070 somewhat noticeably below its MSRP. Now, MSRP at $550, current price $523.79, so $524. Okay, it's not massively below its MSRP, but it is below its MSRP, and currently NVIDIA is running a Battlefield 4, not Battlefield 4, Borderlands 4 bundle with their 50 series cards that are 70 class or above, and Amazon is a participating retailer listed here on NVIDIA's website, and this deal does go through September 22nd. So with that in mind, especially if you're also interested in the game bundle, but even not, if you're not, the actual price of the GPU is the best we have seen. So far, the only NVIDIA GPUs to go below MSRP I've seen was the 8GB 5060 Ti, which is just an awful buy. Now, the 5070 doesn't have an amazing VRAM capacity here at 12 gigabytes. If this had 16, this would be a very obvious buy. With only 12, there is still, okay, what about the AMD alternative? Some of my viewers may know that I still teach math full-time in addition to running this YouTube channel. I love it, but the hardest part of teaching isn't delivering clear information, it's keeping the students interested and engaged, which is why I absolutely love and highly recommend today's sponsor, Boot.dev, for anyone looking to learn back-end web development from start to finish in Python, Go, SQL, and more. Boot.dev uses tactics learned from modern game design like XP levels, achievements, quests, and global leaderboards to combat boredom and keep you motivated moving forward to your goal. But in addition to the gamified systems to improve motivation, Boot.dev is also designed around how people actually learn, with a focus on writing a lot of code and building real projects. They recently launched the Training Grounds, a place where you can grind infinite challenges to give you as much practice as you need. Boots, a wizard bear, is your personal AI tutor who uses a Socratic teaching method, asking you questions to deepen your understanding rather than just feeding you answers. According to Stack Overflow, the median salary for a back-end developer in the US in 2024 was over $100,000. So level up your earning potential with Boot.dev, and they stand behind their product with a 30-day no questions asked refund policy and a free demo of the interactive experience on every course. Go to Boot.dev and try out the courses for free. Then use my code DanielOwen to get 25% off your entire first year if you choose the annual plan. Now, the problem with the AMD alternative right now in the United States, I realize that worldwide pricing here could be very different. So realize I'm speaking to the United States market. The RX 9070 is still $600. So if we look at this, it's $600 for the 9070 versus $524 for the 5070. That's about 14.5% more money to get the 9070. But the 9070 is faster on average, but by about 9%, which actually means that the NVIDIA card here is offering better performance per dollar, which is extremely unusual. Usually AMD has to offer better performance per dollar at any particular budget or performance tier, to get a lot of recommendations. Whereas here we're currently seeing the 5070 offering more performance per dollar on the competing product. And they do have the game bundle if you have any interest in that. I know not everybody's going to have interest in Borderlands 4, but you could factor that in if you are interested. Now, AMD is living on it has 16 gigabytes of VRAM, key factor here. So that is a key factor. It's absolutely a key factor. So if you don't want to buy into a 12 gigabyte card right now, then don't buy a 5070. Honestly, if you're happy with your graphics card right now, it's probably a good idea to wait until the end of 2025 or the beginning of 2026, which is when it's heavily rumored that we will be getting the Super Series from NVIDIA. And the lineup is supposed to have the 3 gigabyte VRAM modules to replace 2 gigabyte VRAM modules, which essentially gets you a 50% VRAM increase on your model. So we would expect a 5070 Super to have 18 gigabytes of VRAM if the rumors all pan out. And they're rumored from all of the, the biggest sources, Compite7, Kimi, all of that. So we would expect this to happen. But again, this is still leaks and rumors territory. The 5070 Ti also rumored to go from 16 to a super version at 24 with that 50% increase, and also the 5080 to get a 5080 Super with a 50% VRAM increase up to 24 as well. Now, we're not expecting a lot of additional performance because the overall specs are going to be fairly similar from what we've seen. If they push the clocks and power levels a bit, there could be a performance bump as well, but probably nothing like staggering. It's going to be, I think, mostly the VRAM upgrade to sell the Super Series. So basically, what I'm getting at right now is performance per dollar wise, the 5070 at around $500 is a pretty attractive option in everything other than its 12 gigabyte VRAM capacity. So my overall thought on that is that currently it's not a big deal. There are the occasional game at max settings where that can currently cause issues. Where I expect it to become a problem is in the near future. So especially whenever we get like a PS6 generation of console, so that the visual design of games starts to have a next-gen target, I would expect that games that are currently, fine on 12, because the current gen of console has 16 gigabytes of unified memory, and 12-ish gigabytes of VRAM of that is generally dedicated to VRAM-related tasks. As we get a next-gen console, it'll definitely have more than 16 gigabytes of unified memory. Who knows exactly how much, but that's where I would personally expect to start to see it become more and more common for graphic settings to need to be turned down on 12. Now, obviously, it'll just mean graphic settings will need to be turned down. I don't think that games are going to just not work on a 12 gigabyte card, especially considering there's still so many people on 8 gigabyte cards, which are definitely having issues with max settings right now. So I think buying a 12 gigabyte card now is kind of like buying an 8 gigabyte card, 4 years ago or so, where, yeah, they're starting to feel it now. I think, in 4 years from now, you'll definitely be feeling it on the 12 gigabyte card, and you're already starting to see situations now, even on a 1440p display. Anyway, that being said, with those caveats, 5070 at this price with the game bundle, if you're interested in it, does seem pretty interesting. Now, if this is over your budget, then I think we need to talk about another interesting development in the US market. For most of its lifespan, the Intel Arc B580 has not been in stock anywhere near its MSRP, but recently it's come back in stock at its MSRP of $250. And not only that, but Intel is currently running, at least for another week at the time of filming, I think it ends on September 14th, they're currently running a Battlefield 6 bundle. Now, for me personally, Battlefield 6 is a much more interesting bundled game than Borderlands 4, but obviously everybody's gaming tastes are different, and your interests are different. But if you're interested in buying Battlefield 6, that's an expensive game. So if you were already going to buy that and factor that into the pricing here on the B580, then suddenly this becomes pretty interesting, especially giving you more than 8 gigabytes of VRAM at $250, getting 12 here, whereas the direct competitor from NVIDIA with the RTX 5050, which is at exactly the same price, offers you similar overall performance, but only with 8 gigabytes of VRAM, and the NVIDIA bundle deal does not apply to the 5050 or the 5060 or 5060 Ti. It's 5070 and up. So the B580 from Intel is actually pretty interesting right now, but with one major caveat. Do not buy this GPU if you do not have a modern enough CPU and motherboard platform to support ResizeBAR. Do some research, make sure you support that. Maybe you need a BIOS update if you never do those, but do research your situation on that, because Intel Arc GPUs are just not supported on platforms without ResizeBAR. You will have a terrible experience. Also, you should just make sure you have a decent CPU overall, because one thing, especially kind of ironic with a game like Battlefield 6, which is actually oftentimes CPU limited in its performance if you have a fairly modern GPU, and especially if you're playing at lower graphic settings for that kind of competitive edge, you're often CPU limited, but the Intel Arc GPUs still have additional CPU driver overhead compared to AMD and NVIDIA. What this means is, if you are CPU limited in your gaming situation, your CPU is the limiting factor, you will be CPU limited at a lower frame rate than you would be on AMD or NVIDIA GPUs. So it kind of is a bit of a catch-22 on the lower end, budget options, because the B580 at this price with 12 gigabytes of VRAM and the Battlefield 6 bundle, on the face of it, I've got to say there's a lot to recommend here. But if you're buying a budget GPU because you're on an older platform or pairing it with like older parts, you've got to make sure that you're not getting yourself into a CPU overhead issue, or that you have the resizable bar support. Also, just again, caveat, Intel drivers have come a long way, but I've still seen more issues with them than I do on AMD and NVIDIA, especially new game releases being like supported day one, good experience out of the box. So yeah, I really wish I could just wholeheartedly recommend a budget option. Instead, I'm going to give you a couple of options under $300, and you can see which one looks better for you. So number one, B580 if you were already going to buy Battlefield 6, because if you factor that into the price, with the 12 gigabytes of VRAM, it's a pretty interesting offer. Now, and as long as you have a good enough CPU and you have resizable bar support. For everyone else, if you can spring $30 more, you can get the 9060 XT from AMD, but the problem is that this is an 8 gigabyte graphics card. 8 gigabyte graphics cards would have been nice to have 12 like the Intel option, right? And we're paying more money here. That being said, the 9060 XT does offer a lot more raw performance than the B580 does, but it's also not coming with a game bundle here. Now, those of you who don't care about Battlefield 6, you were not going to buy that anyway, then that's irrelevant to the decision that you're making here, right? So in that case, the 9060 XT is a good choice. Also, if you're pairing this with an older system, you actually have 16 PCIe lanes, unlike some of the NVIDIA options here, which if you do run out of 8 gigabytes of VRAM is going to be helpful. And also compared to the Intel option, we don't have the CPU overhead. You don't resizable bar is not required. So anyway. So maybe for some other budget users, the 9060 XT 8 gigabytes is going to be a good option. But again, newest games, even at 1080p, at their max settings, this GPU is strong enough for it, but will run out of VRAM at times. You'll have to be reducing graphic settings if you're playing the latest games. That's just the way it is. But those are kind of my two budget under $300 options. If you're spending over $300, I don't recommend going with the 5060 Ti 8 gigabyte version, because at $335 on the cheapest models, and most of them well above that, the 9060 XT 8 gigabyte offers similar performance, same VRAM, but less money. The more money you spend on an 8 gigabyte card, the worse it's going to feel already right now, and especially as games just get more and more VRAM hungry. So if you want a 16 gigabyte GPU, with all the performance you really need to enjoy the latest games at 1080p and 1440p, potentially with some upscaling, the 9060 XT 16 gigabyte version is at $380 right now. What I don't like about this is that it's noticeably above its MSRP. The AMD options are pretty much all above their MSRP except for that 8 gigabyte 9060 XT right now. It's unfortunate. That being said, the 9060 XT 16 gigabyte is still the best graphics card under $400. This is going to, like I said, perform very well at 1080p and 1440p in the latest games. And FSR 4 is now a good competitor to DLSS. And AMD's ray tracing on this generation is actually not bad either. The latest path tracing games might not be the greatest experience here, but even on a 5060 Ti, they're maybe not an amazing experience either. So you really probably want to buy a heftier GPU for those path tracing games anyway. My only real hang up here is that, again, I'd like to see it at its MSRP of $350, but also that FSR 4 support hasn't been nearly as widespread as DLSS support. Now, if you're somebody who's comfortable using something like Optiscaler, which is a free mod you can get on GitHub and takes all of about 20 seconds to install into a game, you can get FSR 4 into most games. Now, I'll say single-player games, though, because multiplayer games run anti-cheat, and I am not going to recommend you mod any sort of files when there's anti-cheat involved. So, again, a little bit of a caveat there. If we were seeing FSR4 support just in every single game that was coming out these days, that would be one thing. But we're not. Hopefully it gets better. And it's not terrible, but DLSS support is certainly more widespread. And on this class of hardware, especially if you're playing at 1440p, I really think you will probably be wanting to use at least DLSS or FSR4 at the quality level settings in a lot of the newest titles. And they look good enough that, frankly, oftentimes better than native with TAA. So anyway, but that additional support is really nice to have. And so that's where you need to ask yourself, are you going to spend a little bit more money and get the 5060 Ti 16 gigabyte? Now, the wider the price gap, the easier it is to recommend the AMD option. But right now, the 5060 Ti 16 gigabyte is $430. If the 9060 XT 16 gigabyte could actually hit its MSRP of $350, $80 price gap at this price range, pretty significant. Right now we're at a $50 price gap at $430 versus $380, and it's not unreasonable for somebody with the budget for a $380 graphics card to maybe stretch up to $430. If we want to think of it from a percentages standpoint, $430 divided by $380 tells us that you're spending about 13% more money to get the NVIDIA GPU. They have very similar performance, but the NVIDIA GPU is, in my testing, on average about 8% faster. A lot of people have it somewhere between 5 to 10% faster, meaning that performance per dollar wise, yeah, the 9060 XT 16 gigabyte is slightly better, but only slightly. And then you have the broader support of DLSS. AMD still doesn't have their ray reconstruction competitor out there. Productivity application support still tends to be better on the NVIDIA side. So there's a lot of additional niceties you get on the NVIDIA side for that extra 13% more money. Again, if there was the wider price gap here like there was at launch, easier to recommend the AMD option. Here I'm going to say, if the 430 fits in your budget, it's not really a bad choice. If you're comfortable using Optiscaler on a regular basis, then yeah, maybe save the $50. I could go with kind of a split recommendation here. But if you need to stay under 400, then the 9060 XT 16 gigabyte is certainly the best, best GPU under $400. Anyway, so like I said, if we're going up to higher price brackets, I think the 5070 is pretty interesting there if you can go up to around the $500 mark. And the 9070 is offering worse performance per dollar right now, with that 16 gigabytes of VRAM being the only argument there. And I do think that matters, but starting at like an $80 price gap here in favor of the NVIDIA option. So I don't think I can recommend the 9070 right now. And then the 9070 XT is also really close to the NVIDIA competition in the market here. So the 9070 XT is currently $700, so $100 above its MSRP, whereas the 5070 Ti is currently at $750, so $50 more. And in this case, they both have 16 gigabytes of VRAM. So at $50 difference, when you're already spending $700, or if you want to think about it percentage-wise, 750 divided by 700, you're only spending 7% more money on the NVIDIA option. In my testing, they're on average about the same performance, other than in the path tracing workloads. Normal ray tracing, they're actually pretty comparable as well. In path tracing workloads, I do have the 5070 Ti noticeably faster, and it's fast enough to use it, and it has enough VRAM to use it. So personally, I would easily spend the extra 7% on the 5070 Ti over the 9070 XT. Now, I know some of you don't live in the United States, and the price gap is way larger in AMD's favor. If it starts to get to $100, I think there's a pretty good argument either way, and if it's like $150 advantage for the 9070 XT, then I think, if that money matters to you, right? Like, I don't know what your budget is, what your money situation is, then it's pretty easy to recommend the 9070 XT over the 5070 Ti. But in the United States right now, $50, 7%, when you're already spending $700, I would easily recommend the 5070 Ti over the 9070 XT at these prices. Now, is it worth spending anything more than this? Well, the 5080 is at much better pricing than it has been for a long time. It's currently at $1,000. Now, there's multiple models available at that pricing. Just about a month and a half ago, I couldn't find them below like $1,200. So they're significantly better option than they were just a little over a month ago. but they're still not an amazing deal. They still offer worse value than the 5070 Ti. So for example, $1,000 divided by 750, you're spending 33% more money on the 5080, when in my testing, it's only 14% faster than the 5070 Ti. They have the same amount of VRAM, so in that case, it's certainly a better value to buy the 5070 Ti. So I'm not going to recommend a 5080, but if you've already maxed out everything else in your build, then, you are getting more performance, and if you have the budget for it, you could go for it. It's just not a very good value. And, the 5090 is still the most powerful thing out there by a long shot, but it's also seeing about $2,300 for the lowest priced options in the United States. So, yeah, if you are playing on like a 4K 240 hertz OLED, money's no object, yeah, the 5090 is a lot faster than anything else out there. And so, it costs what it costs. So if you think spending $2,300 isn't that big of a deal, you're not going into debt, you're not missing a rent payment, you just want to know, is it actually that much better than a 5080? Yes, it is that much better than a 5080, not performance per dollar wise, it's not good performance per dollar, but it is a lot more performance. So if you don't care about the money that much, there it is. And it's 32 gigabytes of VRAM. It's very future-proof, but yeah, if you know who you are, if you can buy that, then you probably already bought one already. But anyway, so if you want the overall kind of breakdown of the recommendations today, money's unlimited. Buy yourself a 5090. High-end recommendation, other than that, where you're more value conscious, 5070 Ti. Now, if you can only go up to around $500, the RTX 5070 is at the best pricing we have ever seen it at, and if you have any reason to care about Borderlands 4, that currently sweetens the deal. Below that point, I would say that the 9060 XT 16GB version is a very interesting option if you can't go over $400, but the 5060 Ti 16GB version isn't that much more money, so might also be worth considering. Below this point, it gets really shaky. If you want Battlefield 6 and you have a system with ResizeBAR and a decent CPU, the Intel Arc B580 is interesting. If you aren't interested in Battlefield 6, or maybe you don't have ResizeBAR support, but you're looking to upgrade your GPU, the 9060 XT 8GB version at $280 is also interesting. Those are my recommendations for September. Do one of these every month, so if you want to stay up to date on the latest, definitely keep following the channel. And I have, I'll especially be interested in seeing how things change as we get into those super series, which are heavily rumored toward the end of the year or beginning of the next one. I hope you guys found the video useful and or interesting, and you all have an excellent day.